The colony ship Dandelion was the quietest place in the universe that morning. It moved through deep space like a slow, sleeping whale, carrying 4,200 people toward a new world called New Gyeongju. Most of them were families, young couples, old grandparents who wanted to see one more new sky before they died. And children. 312 children, to be exact. They ran through the hallways and played in the observation decks and pressed their small faces against the windows to watch the stars slide past like silver fish. Hana was in the medical bay, checking a little girl's ears. The girl's name was Unji, and she was 7 years old. She had big round eyes and a gap between her front teeth, and she talked too much about everything. Hana liked her. Unji was the kind of child who made adults believe the universe was still a good place. "Will there be dogs on the new planet?" Unji asked. "We're bringing some," Hana said. "You can help name them." Unji smiled so wide her eyes almost disappeared. Beside her sat Dohyun, a 9-year-old boy with messy hair and serious eyes. He was Unji's best friend. He didn't talk as much, but he always stayed close to her, like a small guard who hadn't been told his shift was over. The alarm hit like a punch to the chest. Red light flooded the medical bay. The ship shuddered. Unji grabbed Dohyun's arm, and Dohyun grabbed the edge of the bed, and Hana grabbed both of them and pulled them close. The captain's voice came over the speakers, shaking and thin. "All passengers, remain calm. We have been intercepted. Please move to the inner compartments." Through the observation windows, they could see the ships, long and dark and covered in sharp angles, like weapons that had learned to fly. They carried the markings of the Valori Dominion, a reptilian empire that ruled 40 star systems, and believed every other species in the galaxy existed to serve them. The Dandelion was not a warship. It had no weapons. It had no shields worth mentioning. It was a bus full of families floating in the dark. Warlord Sevik's face appeared on every screen aboard the ship. He was tall and scaled, and his eyes were the color of cold metal. He did not negotiate. He did not ask questions. He simply told them they were trespassing in Valori space, and that they now belonged to the Dominion. Then the screen went black. The boarding craft hit the Dandelion's hull like fists against a door. Valori shock troops stormed through the airlocks, in heavy armor, carrying neural lash weapons that could burn a person's nervous system with a single touch. The colonists had nothing. No guns, no armor, no training. But they had their children behind them, and that was enough to make ordinary people do extraordinary things. Mothers and fathers formed walls in the corridors. They linked arms and stood shoulder to shoulder and refused to move. They threw chairs and tools and food containers. They bit and kicked and scratched. An old man named Genwu, 73 years old, broke a Valori soldier's visor with a fire extinguisher before 3 others brought him down. A young mother named Jihei fought so hard that the Valori needed 5 soldiers to restrain her, and even then, she kept screaming for her daughter. They hit small bodies with weapons designed for adult combat soldiers. They did not lower the settings. They did not hesitate. Yunji was struck in the back, and she fell forward onto the metal floor, and her body jerked and twisted, and she screamed a sound that Dohyun would hear in his dreams for the rest of his life. Several other children were hit. Some went silent. Some cried so hard they couldn't breathe. Dohyun's mother threw herself over him. A Valori soldier hit her twice, and she stopped moving, but she did not let go of her son. She held him even as she fell. Dohyun lay under his mother's body and felt her heartbeat get slower and slower, and he did not make a sound. He just held her hand and watched the boots walk past. The Valori rounded up everyone who could still stand and forced them into the cargo holds. They packed them in like animals. No food, no water, no medical supplies. Hana managed to hide a small emergency kit in her clothes, and she immediately went to the children, moving from one small body to the next, doing what she could with almost nothing. Unji couldn't feel her left hand anymore. The neural lash had damaged the nerves permanently. She was 7 years old, and she would never have full use of that hand again. Hana held her and whispered soft things, and tried to keep her voice from breaking. Do-hyun sat in the corner of the cargo hold, with his mother's blood on his shirt, and his eyes dry and empty. He did not cry. He had gone somewhere inside himself, where the world couldn't reach him yet. Sevik recorded a message and broadcast it to the entire galaxy through the Concord Council's communication network. He stood in front of the captured colonists and smiled. "Let this be a lesson," he said. "The soft species should know their place." The message traveled at the speed of light across 1,000 relay stations. It reached every major civilization, and it reached Earth. Chancellor Sujin watched the recording alone in her office. She saw the children. She saw Unji's face twisted in pain. She saw Do-hyun sitting in blood. She saw Hana trying to stitch a wound with strips torn from her own clothing. Sujin watched the entire recording without moving. Her assistant said later that her expression never changed, not once, and that was the most frightening thing they had ever seen, because Sujin was a woman who smiled at everything. She smiled when she was happy, and she smiled when she was angry, and she smiled when she was making the hardest decisions of her life. But she did not smile at this. She stood up, she walked to the door. She opened it, and looked at her cabinet members who were gathered in the hallway, pale and silent, and she said 5 words. "Wake up the entire fleet." Then she closed the door. On the Dandelion, in the dark cargo hold, Hana held Unji against her chest, and whispered to all the children huddled around her. "Don't be scared. They're coming for us." She kissed the top of Unji's head. "They always come." The Concord Council chamber was the largest room in the known galaxy. It was shaped like a bowl, carved from white stone on a neutral station that floated between 3 star systems. 212 species had seats there. When the emergency session was called, nearly all of them sent representatives. The room was full of sounds that human ears could not hear, and colors that human eyes could not see, and a fear that every species understood perfectly. The Valori recording played on the central screen. Every delegate watched. Some turned away. A few species that reproduced differently did not understand at first why the humans would be so upset. But most of them understood. Most of them had young. Most of them looked at those small human bodies on the floor and felt something cold move through them. Delegate Omara stood up. She was Philithian, a tall and thin species covered in soft silver fur. She had spent 40 years studying humans. She had eaten their food, and listened to their music, and watched their history unfold, in archives that were older than most galactic civilizations. She knew things about humans that humans didn't know about themselves. The chamber fell quiet when she spoke. "You do not understand what you are witnessing," she said. Her voice was calm, but her hands were shaking, and anyone who knew Philithians knew that meant she was terrified. Most species protect their young out of biological instinct. Humans do that too, but they have something else, something I have never seen in any other species in this galaxy. They protect all children, not just their own bloodline, not just their own species, any child, anywhere. She paused and looked around the room. They have gone to war with each other. They have killed millions of their own kind over harm done to children. And you think they will show restraint to an alien species that tortured 300 of their young? No one spoke. Omara lowered her voice. "I beg this council, do not intervene. Do not stand between humans and those children. You will not survive the experience." She sat down. The council voted. The result was overwhelming. 198 species voted to stay out of it. 14 abstained. None voted to intervene. Within hours, Alien embassies near Valori space began closing. Ships pulled out. Trade routes were abandoned. The space around the Valori Dominion became very, very empty. On Earth, things moved with a speed that frightened the rest of the galaxy. Admiral Tejo was 61 years old. He had gray hair and a quiet face, and he walked slowly everywhere he went, like a man who was never in a hurry, because he always arrived exactly when he needed to. He had commanded the United Earth Navy for 9 years, and in that time, there had been no major conflicts. People sometimes forgot that the quiet ones were quiet for a reason. He walked into the UEN command center at 6 in the morning. Every screen showed different things: fleet positions, supply lines, intelligence reports, Valori military strength. He looked at all of it for a long time. Then he looked at the officers standing around the room, waiting for his orders, and he said, "Show me where my children are. Not the colonists, not the civilians, my children." The room moved like a machine that had been waiting for someone to press the button. Jinho was 34, and he ran the intelligence division from a basement office that smelled like old coffee and burned circuits. He was the kind of person who forgot to eat, and forgot to sleep, and forgot his own birthday, but never forgot a single number, or pattern, or encryption key. His team was given the Valori military communication network, and told to crack it. The best estimate was 6 months. Jinho did it in 19 hours. When his assistant asked him how, he looked up from his screen with red eyes and said one word: motivation. Within those 19 hours, Jinho's team had mapped every Valori military installation, every ship position, every supply depot, and every communication relay in 40 star systems. They knew where the Dandelion was being held. They knew where Sevik was stationed. They knew everything. And the fleet mobilized. Not a task force, not a strike group, the entire United Earth Navy. 1,400 warships, every active vessel, every reserve, every ship that could be pulled from patrol or escort or training. Retired officers were called back. Civilian transport ships were refitted with weapons in overnight operations that should have taken weeks. Factories that made furniture and electronics and children's toys switched to producing ammunition and armor plates and medical supplies. They did it in 48 hours. The production managers didn't ask why. They had seen the recording too. Captain Yuna stood on the bridge of the battle cruiser Iron Lullaby and briefed her crew. She was 38. She had short hair and sharp eyes and a voice that could cut through a storm. Before she joined the Navy, she had spent 3 years volunteering at an orphanage on Earth. She had held children who had no one else to hold them. She had told them they were safe when the world had given them no reason to believe it. She showed her crew the images from the Dandelion. The room was silent. Some of them cried. Some of them gripped the edges of their seats until their knuckles went white. "Our rules of engagement are simple," Yuna said. "Anyone who participated in this, anyone who ordered it, enabled it, or stood by while it happened, they do not get to go home." General Minho was in charge of ground forces. He was 45 and built like a wall, and he had the kind of face that looked like it had never smiled, even though everyone who knew him said he was one of the kindest men alive. A journalist caught him outside the military headquarters and asked if the response was proportionate. Minho stopped walking. He looked directly into the camera. "They hurt our kids," he said. "There is no such thing as proportionate." The Valori had no idea what was coming. Grand Tyrant Rokai sat in his palace on the Valori homeworld and read reports about the human mobilization and laughed. He was 8 feet tall and covered in dark green scales, and he had ruled the Dominion for 30 years through fear and strength. He did not understand love that was so deep it became something heavier than hate. "They will send a delegation," he told his advisors. "They will cry and negotiate, and we will give back a few of their people and take whatever we want in return. This is how soft species work." Ambassador Talon stood at the back of the room and said nothing. He was the only Valori diplomat who had spent real time among humans. He had seen their history. He had visited their war memorials. He had stood in places where they had done terrible things to each other, over things far smaller than this. He tried to speak. He tried to tell Rokai to return the colonists immediately, to apologize, to offer everything they had. Rokai called him a coward in front of the entire court, and dismissed him. Talon walked out of the palace, and looked up at the stars, and felt something he had never felt before. He felt sorry for his own species. The United Earth Fleet entered hyperspace that night. 1,400 ships in perfect formation. No flags, no declarations of war, no messages, no threats. Just 1,400 warships moving through folded space in complete silence, aimed at 40 star systems like a hand reaching for a throat. Aboard the flagship, the UES Unconditional, Tejo sat in his command chair. The bridge crew worked around him in quiet efficiency. No one spoke unless they needed to. On Tejo's console, taped to the edge with a small piece of clear tape, was a photograph of a little girl. She was 6 years old. She was his niece. She had the same kind of big round eyes that Unji had. Tejo looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he looked at the stars ahead and said nothing at all. The Valori expected the humans to come for their homeworld first. Every military strategy in their history said the same thing. You strike the capital. You cut the head off the enemy, and the body falls. Rokai positioned his best ships around the homeworld and waited for the blow. It never came. Instead, Tejo did something that no species in galactic history had ever attempted. He split his fleet into 40 groups and sent them to every single Valori star system at the same time. Every system, every planet, every station, every outpost. 1,400 ships spread across 40 points of light and closed around them like fingers forming a fist. They called it Operation Closed Garden. The Concord Council received a single transmission from Earth. It was short and polite, and it was the most frightening diplomatic message the galaxy had ever heard. The United Earth Navy is conducting a law enforcement operation in Valori space. We advise all non-Valori species to evacuate immediately through designated humanitarian corridors. These corridors will remain open for 72 hours. After that, nothing enters or leaves. The corridors were real. Human ships opened safe passages at every blockade point, carefully marked and actively protected. Non-Valori merchant ships, civilian transports, embassy vessels, all of them were guided through without a single shot fired. Human communications officers were polite. They wished departing ships safe travels. One human officer even apologized for the inconvenience. The alien captains who passed through those corridors said later that the politeness was the worst part. It meant the humans were not angry. Anger burns out. This was something colder and deeper. This was a decision. Rokai received the reports one by one. His outer systems were surrounded. His trade routes were cut. His communication relays were jammed by Jinho's electronic warfare teams. 40 star systems, each one wrapped in a net of human warships, and not a single shot had been fired yet. The humans were just sitting there, waiting. Rokai finally understood that this was not a negotiation. He ordered the Valori war fleet to attack. The Valori were not weak. They had 900 warships, built for combat, crewed by soldiers who had been fighting since before humanity left its own solar system. They were proud, and they were skilled, and they had never lost a war. The first battle happened at the Varick system. 200 Valori warships moved against 350 human vessels. The Valori fought the way they always fought. Disciplined, aggressive. They used their heavy plasma cannons to punch through human formations, and their fighter swarms to harass supply lines. In the first hour, they destroyed 23 human ships. Then they noticed something strange. The human ships that were badly damaged did not retreat. They did not withdraw to safe distance to make repairs. Instead, they accelerated. They turned their burning, broken hulls toward the Valori formation and kept coming. Crews that had lost weapons and engines voted among themselves, every single hand raised, and chose to ram rather than run. The first human ship to do this was a small frigate called the Playground. It hit a Valori cruiser at full speed, and both ships turned to light. The Valori had fought many species. They had never fought one that was willing to die like this. Not out of desperation, not out of madness, out of something the Valori had no word for. Yuna and the Iron Lullaby led a flanking attack that broke the Valori line from behind. She moved her ship through enemy fire with a precision that made the Valori targeting systems look slow. She found the Valori flagship in the system, and she hit it with everything she had. The flagship cracked open like an egg, and the Valori formation fell apart. When the surviving Valori ships broadcast their surrender, Yuna accepted it immediately. Human Marines boarded the vessels, secured the crews, treated the wounded, and moved the prisoners to holding areas with food and clean water and medical care. The human rules of war were absolute. You fight until they stop. When they stop, you help them. Because the moment you stop treating the enemy as people, you become the thing you went to war to destroy. While the battles raged across Valori space, Tejo focused on one thing: the children. Jinho had found them. They were being held at a military base on a moon called Varath in the Sevik system. The base was heavily defended. Sevik himself was stationed there, using the colonists as leverage, believing the humans would not risk an assault that might harm the hostages. He was wrong about humans again. General Minho took the ground assault personally. He loaded his soldiers into dropships and looked at their faces before the doors closed. These were the best ground troops humanity had. Men and women who had trained for years and fought in dozens of operations. Some of them had children of their own. Some of them had seen the recording from the Dandelion so many times that they had memorized every face. "We go in fast," Minho told them. "We go in hard. Every child comes home. Every single one." The assault on Varath was over in 4 hours. Human ships cleared the orbital defenses, while Minho's forces dropped through the atmosphere in armored pods that hit the ground like thunder. The Valori base garrison fought hard, but Minho's troops moved through them with a focus that was almost mechanical. They did not waste shots. They did not stop moving. They cleared room after room and corridor after corridor until they reached the cargo hold where the colonists were being kept. The doors blew open and the soldiers rushed in, and then they stopped. The children were huddled together in the corner of a dark, cold room. They were thin and dirty, and some of them were still wounded. Hana was in the middle of them, her clothes torn and stained, her eyes hollow from days without sleep, still holding Unji against her chest. She had kept every single child alive through will alone. She had rationed the tiny scraps of food the Valori threw at them. She had cleaned wounds with water she collected from condensation on the walls. She had told stories and sung songs and held hands in the dark. When she saw the human soldiers in the doorway, she tried to stand, and her legs gave out, and she fell. 2 soldiers caught her before she hit the ground. The combat veterans, men and women who had seen terrible things and never flinched, stood in that room and cried. They cried openly and without shame, because there were children looking up at them with eyes that had seen too much. Do-hyun was sitting apart from the others. He had not spoken since the day of the attack. He looked up at a soldier who was at least twice his size, a giant in powered armor, with weapons on every surface. The soldier was weeping behind his visor, and the tears were running down inside his helmet. Do-hyun reached out and tugged on the soldier's armored glove. "Are you here to take us home?" he asked. His voice was small and rough from not being used. He took off his helmet, so the boy could see his face. He was young, maybe 25. He had tears on his cheeks, and a jaw that was clenched so tight the muscles stood out like rope. He put one hand gently on Do-hyun's shoulder and said, "Yeah, kid, we're here to take you home." Do-hyun nodded once. Then, for the first time in days, he started to cry. The children were evacuated on medical ships. Hana collapsed from exhaustion the moment the last child was loaded, and she slept for 31 hours straight. The colonists were transported to a hospital station, where doctors and counselors and families were already waiting. The galaxy expected the humans to stop now. The children were safe. The colonists were free. The reasonable thing, the logical thing, was to declare victory and negotiate a peace. Chancellor Sujin appeared on every screen in the galaxy. She stood behind a simple podium with no flags and no symbols. Her face was calm, and her voice was steady. "Our children are safe," she said. "We thank God for that. But this is not over. A species that harms children and faces no consequences will harm children again. We will not allow that. Not now. Not ever. Not to any species' children, anywhere." The broadcast ended. The galaxy went silent. On the bridge of the Unconditional, Taeho received his orders. He opened a channel to all 1,400 ships. "All units," he said quietly. "Phase 2, dismantle everything." Phase 2 was not a battle. It was an erasure. The United Earth Navy moved through Valori space, system by system, and took apart every piece of military infrastructure the Dominion had ever built. Shipyards that had taken decades to construct were surrounded and dismantled in hours. Weapons factories were breached by Marine teams who removed every machine, every blueprint, every scrap of material that could be used to build anything that could hurt anyone. Military academies were shut down. Orbital defense platforms were powered off and towed away. Research stations were emptied. The humans did not rush. They did not rage. They worked with the steady, patient thoroughness of people cleaning a house after something terrible had lived in it. And that was what made it so frightening to watch. The Valori fought back. Of course they did. They were a warrior species, and they had pride, and they would not go quietly. In a dozen systems, Valori commanders rallied their remaining ships and launched desperate counterattacks. Some of them were brave. Some of them were brilliant. Some of them managed to hurt the humans badly enough to slow them down for a few hours. But the humans kept coming, ship after ship after ship, pouring through hyperspace like water through a crack. For every human vessel destroyed, 2 more arrived. The Valori began to understand something that Delegate O'Mara had tried to tell the galaxy. Humans were not fighting because they wanted to win. They were fighting because they had decided this would happen. And once humans decided something like this, the concept of losing simply did not exist for them anymore. The strangest part was the silence. Valori captains reported that human ships broadcast nothing during battle. No war cries, no threats, no demands for surrender. Just silence. Open channels with nothing on them but the hum of carrier signals. It was as if the humans had nothing left to say. They had said everything that needed saying when they saw their children bleeding on the floor of a cargo hold. Now there were no words, only the work. Warlord Sevik, the one who had started it all, tried to run. He disguised himself as a merchant, loaded a small ship with supplies and personal wealth, and attempted to slip through the blockade in the chaos of a nearby battle. He thought he was clever. He thought the humans were too busy to notice one small ship among thousands. Jinho noticed. Jinho noticed everything. His intelligence network had been tracking Sevik since the moment the blockade began. Every communication Sevik sent, every ship he contacted, every route he planned. Jinho fed the information to Taeho, who sent a single ship after him. The Iron Lullaby. Yuna caught Sevik's ship in open space between 2 systems. She did not fire. She simply pulled alongside him, matched his speed, and hailed him. When Sevik's face appeared on her screen, she saw fear in his eyes for the first time. Real fear. The kind that comes when a predator realizes it has been prey all along. "Warlord Sevik," Yuna said. Her voice was flat and calm. "You are under arrest for crimes against humanity. Specifically, for the torture of 312 children. You will be taken to Earth. You will face a court, and you will answer for what you did." Sevik was brought aboard in chains. He did not resist. The fight had gone out of him the moment he saw the look in Yuna's eyes. It was not hatred. It was something worse. It was certainty. At the Concord Council, the galaxy watched the Valori Dominion come apart. Species that had once considered humans soft and emotional sat in their seats and said nothing. The chamber was quieter than it had ever been. Delegate Omara attended every session, but rarely spoke. When other diplomats demanded she explain what was happening, demanded she tell them when the humans would stop, she looked at them with her silver eyes and said, "I told you. I told all of you." Several species sent private messages to Earth. Not protests, not demands to stop, offers of alliance, offers of support, offers of friendship. They had seen what happened to species that stood against humanity when its children were involved, and they wanted to be very clear about which side they were on. The last battle was at the Valori homeworld. Rokai had gathered every ship he had left. 300 warships, the final strength of a civilization that had once ruled 40 star systems without challenge. He arranged them in a defensive formation around his planet, and he waited. He had finally stopped laughing. He had finally stopped calling humans soft. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, with his claws gripping the railing and his eyes fixed on the darkness of space, watching for the lights that would end his empire. Teiho arrived with 800 ships. Before the shooting started, Rokai sent a transmission. He offered everything. Full return of all colonists, though they had already been rescued. Massive financial reparations, territory, resources, the public execution of Sevik. Anything, everything. Teiho listened to the entire message. His face did not change. His officers watched him and waited, and the bridge was so quiet they could hear the hum of the air recyclers. Then Teiho responded. "You had a chance to be reasonable before you used neural weapons on 7-year-olds. That chance has expired. Your military will be dismantled. Your government will be dissolved. Your species will be monitored for the next 1,000 years. And every child in your territory, Valori or otherwise, will be placed under the protection of the United Earth Humanitarian Corps. You don't get to be in charge of children anymore." The Battle of the Valori homeworld lasted 11 hours. It was the largest space battle in the recorded history of the galaxy. The Valori fought with everything they had, and some of them fought with honor and courage and skill that even the humans respected. But it was not enough. It was never going to be enough. Rokai's flagship was disabled, not destroyed. The humans targeted its engines and weapons with surgical precision and left the hull intact. Marines boarded the ship and found Rokai on his bridge, standing exactly where he had been standing when the battle began. He had not moved. He surrendered without a word. Human ground forces landed on the Valori homeworld that evening. He had been fighting for weeks without rest, and his eyes were ringed with dark circles, and his voice was hoarse. But his orders were clear, and his soldiers followed them to the letter. They did not burn cities. They did not harm civilians. They did not loot or destroy or take revenge on a population for the crimes of its leaders. They secured military installations. They arrested government officials. And then they did something that confused the Valori so deeply that many of them simply stood in the streets and stared. The humans set up aid stations. They distributed food and clean water and medicine to Valori civilians. Human doctors treated Valori wounded, Human engineers restored power to neighborhoods that had lost it during the battle. They worked quickly and efficiently, and they did it all without being asked and without expecting anything in return. A young Valori child, barely old enough to walk, wandered away from its family during the confusion and stumbled into a human checkpoint. The soldiers on duty were armed and armored, and they looked like giants compared to the small alien. The child stopped and stared up at them with wide, scared eyes. One of the soldiers, a woman named Boyoung, put down her weapon. She knelt in the dust. She took a ration bar from her pocket and held it out to the child. When the child took it, she gently picked it up and carried it back to its family. Because that was the point. That had always been the point. Humans did not protect only human children. They protected all children, even the children of the species that had just tried to destroy them. And this was the thing that the galaxy would remember, long after the battles were forgotten. Not the warships, not the firepower, not the strategic genius of a man like Tejo, but the image of a human soldier kneeling in the dirt to feed an enemy's child. The Concord Council formally recognized the human action as lawful under the Defense of Sapient Minors Clause. That clause had been added to galactic law decades ago at the insistence of the human delegation. At the time, no one had understood why the humans cared so much about it. Now, everyone understood. Ambassador Talon, the Valori diplomat who had tried to stop this before it started, was one of the few Valori leaders not arrested. He was brought before Tejo on the deck of the Unconditional. The two of them stood face to face, one old human admiral, one alien diplomat who had watched his civilization fall. Tejo shook his hand. "You tried," Tejo said. "That matters. Help us rebuild your people into something better." Talon looked at the human's tired face and nodded. He did not trust his voice to speak. Outside the viewport, the Valori homeworld turned slowly in the dark. The fires from the battle were already going out. The aid stations glowed like small warm stars on the surface. Human and Valori figures moved among them together. The war was over. The real work was just beginning. 5 years passed. Worlds turned, stars burned, and the galaxy became a different place. The Valori Dominion was gone, not destroyed, not erased, transformed. The 40 systems that had once been ruled by fear and force were now a monitored protectorate under joint human and Concord Council oversight. The warships were scrap. The palaces were public buildings. The military academies were schools. Warlord Sevik sat in a cell on a station orbiting Earth. He had been tried before the Galactic Humanitarian Court, a court that had not existed before the war. The humans had insisted it be created. They had written the laws and built the chambers and appointed judges from dozens of species. Sevik was found guilty on every count. 312 counts of violence against children. Thousands of counts of assault and illegal detention. He was sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison, in a small, clean room with a window that looked out at the stars he would never travel again. Grand Tyrant Rokai received a different sentence. The court decided that death or imprisonment was too simple for him. Instead, he was sentenced to work in a children's hospital on the Valori homeworld for the rest of his natural life. He was to care for the young of all species. He was to feed them, and clean their rooms and read to them, and hold their hands when they were scared. He was forbidden from ever holding authority over anyone again. The former tyrant of 40 star systems spent his days mopping floors and warming bottles and singing lullabies in a language he was still learning. Some said it was cruel. Others said it was the most human punishment imaginable. Force someone who saw children as worthless to spend every remaining day learning that they are not. Ambassador Talon led the new Valori civilian government. He was not a warrior, and he was not a tyrant, and he was not the leader his people were used to. He was quiet and thoughtful, and he made mistakes and admitted them openly, which was something no Valori leader had ever done. Under his guidance, the Valori were slowly learning to be something other than conquerors. It was hard. Generations of pride and aggression did not disappear in 5 years. But the work continued, day after day, because humans were very good at showing up every day and doing the work. Hana lived on the Valori homeworld now. She had refused to go home after the war. Instead, she built a medical exchange program that trained Valori doctors in pediatric care. She taught them how to treat children gently, how to talk to scared patients, how to hold a small hand without squeezing too hard. The Valori doctors found her strange at first. She was soft and emotional, and she cried when children cried. But they watched how the children responded to her, how they reached for her, how they calmed when she entered the room. And slowly the Valori doctors began to understand that softness was not weakness. It was a kind of strength they had never been taught. Hana kept a photograph on her desk. It showed her in the cargo hold of the Dandelion, surrounded by children, taken by a rescue soldier's helmet camera. She was thin and exhausted, and her clothes were ruined, and she was smiling at a little girl in her arms. She looked at that photograph every morning, and it reminded her why she stayed. Do-hyun was 14 now. He had grown tall and quiet, and he carried himself with a stillness that made people think he was older than he was. He had spent 2 years in therapy after the rescue. He had nightmares that woke him screaming. He had days where he could not speak, and days where he could not stop shaking. But he was getting better, slowly. The way broken things get better when someone holds them together long enough. He traveled to New Gyeongju, the planet his family had been sailing toward on the Dandelion. The colony was thriving now. Green fields stretched to distant mountains, and children played in parks built near clear rivers. At the center of the main settlement there was a memorial garden. It was circular and open to the sky, and in the grass there were 312 small star-shaped lights, one for every child who had been on the Dandelion. The lights were powered by the planet's sun, and they never went out. Not during storms, not during the long winters. Never. Do-hyun stood in the garden for a long time. He found the light with his mother's name engraved at its base. He knelt down and touched it, and the metal was warm from the sun. He stayed there until the stars came out, and the little lights glowed in the grass like fallen pieces of the sky. Unji was 12. She still had nerve damage in her left hand. The doctor said it would never fully heal. She had learned to write with her right hand, and she had learned to draw, and she was very good at both. She drew pictures of stars and ships and soldiers with kind eyes. Her drawings hung in the halls of the United Earth Parliament building on Earth. Every politician, every diplomat, every official walked past them on the way to vote on laws and budgets and treaties. The drawings were small and simple, and they were the most powerful things in the building because they reminded everyone who walked past them what the laws were for. Admiral Taeho retired. He left the Navy quietly, without ceremony, without speeches. He moved to a small house near the coast on Earth, and spent his days reading and walking along the water. He visited the New Gyeongju Memorial once a year, always alone, always on the anniversary. He never gave interviews. He never wrote a memoir. A historian found him once and asked about the war, and Taeho looked at the ocean for a while and said, "There's nothing to be proud of. We did what had to be done. I only wish it hadn't been necessary." Yuna still commanded the Iron Lullaby. She had been offered promotions, desk jobs, advisory positions, commands of entire fleets. She turned down all of them. She wanted to stay on a ship. Specifically, she wanted to escort colony ships, family ships, ships carrying children to new worlds. She ran those escort routes with a focus that bordered on obsession, and no ship under her protection was ever threatened. Pirates saw the iron lullaby on their scanners and changed course. Enemy patrols detected her signature and withdrew. Her reputation was simple and absolute. If Yuna was there, the children were safe. General Minho now led the United Earth Peacekeeping Force, which operated across Concord Council space. His soldiers were trained differently than any military force in the galaxy. They learned combat, yes, but they also learned medicine and construction and child psychology, and how to calm a frightened person in 16 different alien languages. Other species began requesting human peacekeepers for their own conflict zones. Not because humans were the strongest fighters, though they were strong, but because when humans showed up, the children survived. Jinho ran the Galactic Early Warning Network from a station that never slept. His surveillance systems monitored thousands of communication channels across hundreds of species, watching for signs of conflict that might threaten civilian populations. In 5 years, he had detected and helped prevent 6 potential atrocities before they began. He worked 18-hour days, and he drank too much coffee, and he had not taken a vacation since the war. His team worried about him. He told them he would rest when the systems were perfect. They both knew the systems would never be perfect. He kept working anyway. Chancellor Sujin served 1 more term and then retired. On her last day in office, she signed the Children of All Stars Accord. It was a galactic treaty, co-signed by 187 species, declaring that harm to children of any species was a crime against all sapient life, punishable by the full collective response of every signatory. The signing ceremony was held at the Concord Council. When Sujin put her name on the document, the chamber was silent. Then, one by one, every delegate stood, even the ones who were not signatories, even the ones who had no concept of standing as a sign of respect. They stood because they understood that something important had just been written into the law of the galaxy, and the species that had written it was the same species that had proven it was willing to enforce it. The final moment came months later. A new species arrived at the Concord Council. They were called the Dreth. They were young and aggressive, and they had just developed faster than light travel, and they were very excited about their place in the galaxy. Their first ambassador was tall and loud, and he walked into the council chamber like he owned it. He looked around at the hundreds of alien delegates, and he puffed out his chest, and he asked in a voice that carried to every corner of the room, "Which species here is the most dangerous?" The chamber went quiet. 212 species, thousands of delegates, and every single one of them turned to look at the human section. The Dreth ambassador noticed. He saw a small group of human diplomats sitting calmly in their seats, dressed simply, unarmed, unremarkable. Delegate Omara, old now, her silver fur streaked with white, leaned over from her seat and spoke softly to the Dreth ambassador. Her voice was gentle, the way you speak to someone who is about to learn something important. "The humans," she said, "but not for the reason you think. They are not the strongest. They do not have the best technology. They are dangerous because there is one line you must never cross with them. Harm their children, or any children, and they will not stop. They will not negotiate. They will not forgive. They will take apart your entire civilization, brick by brick, and then they will rebuild it into something that will never hurt a child again. And the worst part? They won't even hate you while they do it. They'll just do it. Because to them, protecting children isn't politics. It isn't strategy. It is the most basic law of their existence. So be smart, be wise, and never, ever touch a child." The Dreth ambassador stared across the chamber at the human delegates. The human ambassador, a young woman named Jian with kind eyes and a warm smile, noticed him looking. She waved at him, a small, friendly wave, the kind of wave you might give a neighbor. He did not wave back. He was too busy being afraid. And somewhere, on a green planet circling a distant star, 312 small lights glowed softly in the grass of a memorial garden. The wind moved through the trees, and the stars turned overhead, and the lights did not go out.